Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio program. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. We have with us for our first half hour Fargo Senator Tony Grinberg. He's a Republican. He is the sponsor of a constitutional amendment that we will be speaking about, which was narrowly endorsed in the Senate today to the surprise of some folks, I think including Tony. Also, we will have with us Representative Kylie Overson. She is a Democrat from Grand Forks and a former president of the University of North Dakota student body. And we will be talking about a constitutional amendment that would set up a $450 million college scholarship fund. And this amount of money would essentially be an endowment and would throw off earnings, and the earnings would be used to finance college scholarships for North Dakota students going to both public and private colleges in North Dakota. In our second half hour, we will be discussing legislative issues with the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce. And we will have Mr. Bill Shalhoub, who is a lobbyist for the GNDC, and also a couple of legislators, Senator Kelly Armstrong, a Republican from Dickinson, and Senator Jessica Unruh, a Republican from Beulah. They are both new members of the legislature, and in fact, Senator Unruh was appointed to take the place of Randy Crispin shortly after Randy Crispin was elected last November to the North Dakota Public Service Commission. First of all, let's talk a moment about what happened in the legislature today. We had a couple of driving under the influence bills that got hearings in their respective House and Senate committees. One of them, both of them actually, would impose a mandatory jail term for first-time DUI offenders. They have somewhat different terms. One bill would require a mandatory jail time of 1 day in jail on a non-working day, a day when the person who's convicted does not have to work. If that person is convicted of driving under the influence with a blood alcohol content of 0.21% or greater. Now that is almost 3 times the legal limit, and there's some disquiet about whether that sends a good message to motorists. Is that the only way that you get a mandatory jail term for a DUI offense in North Dakota is to be 0.21%, which is not a level at which you can say, well, I only had a couple beers, because that is being major schnockered. The other bill would require a 2-day jail term or 20 hours community service if you are at least at 0.18% on your first offense. Now, the reason for these thresholds is because there is some concern that mandatory jail sentences for driving under the influence will result in a great new demand for jail space in a state that doesn't have a lot of jail space to spare. And it will also put a bit of a strain on local justice systems, because if you have a mandatory jail sentence for driving under the influence, you're going to have fewer people pleading guilty. We're going to have more trials, so therefore you will need perhaps more prosecutors, more judges, and more police, because the police are going to be spending less time cruising the streets looking to nail these people and more time in court testifying against them. So we will see how that works out. We also had a hearing about the Western Area Water Supply Project, which is a effort to supply fresh water to communities in western North Dakota, and its business plan essentially calls for it to be financed by sales of water to industrial customers in western North Dakota. And when we say industrial customers, we're talking about the oil industry. We're talking about an industry that needs massive amounts of water for hydraulic fracturing and oil well drilling. And the WAS project, as people call it, is going to rely on water sales to finance the rest of its endeavors. And there is some concern in the legislature that this organization, this Western Area Water Authority, is being a bit too aggressive in staking out its turf and competing with privately financed water suppliers, and a network of them have sprung up to serve the water needs of the oil industry, and they frankly don't like the idea of a taxpayer-supported entity competing against them, and so we'll see how that shakes out. And this is something that didn't have anything to do with the Capitol per se, but the Board of Higher Education met by telephone video conference this afternoon to listen to a report that was done by their new general counsel about whether or not the board has been violating North Dakota's open meetings law, and whether or not the chancellor, Mr. Hamshirvani, or Dr. Hamshirvani, has been complicit in these shenanigans. And the general counsel concluded that she went through in detail a number of allegations that have been leveled against the board and against the chancellor, and she concluded that almost all of them had no merit. She did say that the board, or members of the board, a small number of the board has 8 voting members, and they have an executive committee, and she did say that an executive committee of the board may have held an illegal meeting in October of 2012 with the chancellor about tuition rates at Minot State University. She said that as a result of this, the participants in the meeting were being questioned about what was said so that they can try to reconstruct the minutes of that meeting and post them on the Board of Higher Education's website. We will see how well it is accepted that the Board of Higher Education's investigation of itself has turned out well, and we'll see how much credibility that has in the wider world, specifically in the legislature, where some folks, including Senator Grinberg, who's with us tonight, would like it very much if the chancellor went away, and we will be talking to him about that. And with that cheerful note in mind, let's move on to a bit more hopeful subject, which is college scholarships. Senator Grinberg, you are the sponsor of a constitutional amendment that was approved today that would supply money for college scholarships, hopefully in perpetuity. And could you just talk about what that proposal does?
Sure. Dale, and once again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight. And I think your listeners also should know that how busy and how hardworking we are in the legislature. Tonight's the first time I've met Kylie, and she's here with me tonight on your show, and we just met. So it's day 45 as the calendar shows, and it's an amazing process that we work through here in serving the citizens in North Dakota.
It is. The legislators in the Capitol are ricocheting around. In fact, I tried to catch up to Representative Overson to invite her on the show yesterday, and she was, frankly, quite a bit too fast for me, and I had to wind up emailing her to ask her.
Well, another thing to recognize with the proposal that did pass the Senate today would put the issue in front of the voters in November of 2014. It's very paramount in what has been proposed. But, Dale, let me share with you kind of my perspective why I primed this piece of legislation. It started back with my interest in 2007. As you might recall, I proposed a concept called the North Dakota Promise. And what that was intended to accomplish was to challenge K-12 education, kids to achieve higher academic achievement in science and math. And in reward for that, the state would put a mechanism or a plan in place that would reward academic performance in high school and then pay you, or an incentive, if you will, if you earned it, to go into college. And the plan at the time overwhelmingly passed the Senate, by the way, in 2007. It had a trust fund component to it, and it had 100% tuition coverage if you qualified. Well, it did not survive the total session of 2007, but what happened in 2009 and 2011 is that the hard work of the education committees in the North Dakota legislature challenged rigor in K-12 education. It came up with a plan to increase performance and expectations with kids in science and math and higher academic achievement, and then the reward was put in place. And present, there's a $6,000 reward if you achieve in high school to go to college. And this session we're debating a $10,000 total. And so largely the concept that was proposed in 2007 is in law today. The two main differences are, one, it's not 100% of tuition costs, and two, we fund it every biennium, and there's no sustainable trust fund. And so, look at where our state was in 07 and where we are today with the strong economic times and the voters passing the legacy fund. What I propose is let's continue to have a discussion about let's institutionalizing a scholarship program that puts North Dakota ahead of every other state in the nation. And quite frankly, I was surprised it passed today because I'm not sure we're quite ready yet to embrace what the voters told us a few years ago with establishing the legacy fund. And there's an interim study now to start to decide what to do. Clearly, a decade from now, we could have $25 billion in this legacy fund. And so, at some point, whether, as I said on the floor today, this ultimately passes the House and then goes to the voters in November of 14, or does not make it, I think by 2015 or 2017, we're going to continue to visit this. And Wyoming has a successful program called the Hathaway Scholarship Program that's funded by Natural Resources. So I just think as we look at to the future, the potential with the legacy fund, if all things stay the same with oil activity, that's just a fraction of where this fund's going to go. And what a better thing to do to challenge our kids. One of the misnomers of the 2007 legislation, it was called free tuition. It was nothing but the truth. It was you had to achieve a certain level of academic attainment and then be rewarded and maintain that achievement in college. So it's a great debate. I'm not sure where it's going to end up going, but I think by and large North Dakotans will welcome this, whether they vote on it now or whether we ask them in 2015.
Representative Overson, this has been something that the Democratic caucus has talked a bit about, the idea of using oil money for college scholarship incentives. And I want you to talk about what you think about this idea and also about your own background as a recent student at UND, and I understand someone who's going back there to go to law school.
Right, yeah.
And just tell us what your thoughts are.
Yes, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for having us, and a big thank you to Senator Grinberg for introducing this. It's really an important piece of legislation that we have before us this session. And about half of the voters in my district are college students. I just got out of school myself, and like you said, we'll be going back to school, so I relate very well to the issue of college affordability. And the biggest discussion we've seen in the legislature is with the economic times that we're facing right now, how do we responsibly invest these dollars for the future of our state? And really, what better investment can we make than our young people and the future of our state? These are going to be our doctors, our lawyers, our nurses, our teachers, our engineers, and we're giving them a chance to say, hey, we value you enough that we want to give you funds to go to school here and stay here in the future. So it's a great piece of legislation. It's really going to affect a lot of young people, and I'm hoping we can make some progress with it in the House.
One of the things that was mentioned in terms of the amount of money we're talking about here in the Senate was, I think it was $1,500 per year and 2,800 scholarships, something of that nature. And can you talk about how influential that would be to, cutting down student debt, to encouraging good academic performance? It would,
it makes a huge difference. Anything that we can do to increase the affordability of getting a college education right now is huge. $1,500 a year, I believe is what you just said, would make a very large impact on a student's life. So many of us right now are working 2 or 3 jobs just to pay for our own tuition and pay for our rent and our groceries. So $1,500 a year is such a difference to those students who are coming out, who are taking out thousands of dollars in loans. If we can lessen that burden on them, it's all the better.
And as I understand it, Senator Grinberg, if the earnings of this fund grow, if they're perhaps better than has been anticipated, then these scholarships either can be extended to more students or the actual amounts can be increased.
Yes, and that's, I think that the ultimate goal is to allow the legislature to decide about the criteria as well as the funds. And the 2007 plan actually put $40 million. It was proposed to put $40 million a biennium over 20 years to create a $400 million trust fund that would, based on actuarial with students and anticipated qualification, would pay through interest earnings. Same thing is discussed here with the $450 million number. So the concept is this legislature or the citizens would ultimately vote on putting that principle away, and then the legislature would have to manage the dollars amount eligible and to move forward. So
Representative Overson, I'm trying to think of how to put this, but how would an initiative such as this, where you have a large amount of money essentially being put into trust for college scholarships, what effect is this going to have to, for want of a better term, student morale on campus?
I think it'll have a positive impact on student morale. Often there's negative feelings towards college students in the college towns. People aren't always aware of the positive impacts that they have. So for the legislature to step up, bring this to the voters and say, hey, we want to keep you here, I think that'll have a positive impact on them. They'll be more likely to stay in North Dakota and attend our public schools, more likely to stay here afterwards. If we as a state can say, we know that the colleges and the students that they're serving have a positive impact on our state and we want to invest in them.
I was just wondering what kind of signal they would take it as.
Can I take a crack at that?
Please, would you?
I'm a father of a daughter who's a senior and a son who's a sophomore.
In high school.
In high school.
Yes.
And I can tell you 4 years ago when we entered into our freshman year at orientation at the high school, a packed, was Fargo South and where I represent, and it was a packed gymnasium with parents and kids back to school night, and the counselor took the stage and said, parents, you need to pay attention. The legislature just created a very powerful program to challenge your kids and then reward them. And I can tell you that they repeat that, and that's going across at all the schools in the state. And so what a powerful message that parents now are engaged, because there's an incentive because of the high cost of college, and if they perform, it's going to reward them. And so I think this thing is really resonating across the state, what's in place today. It's just how do we make sure we're institutionalizing this so it's for future generations?
Yeah, what I was getting to with you, Representative Overson, I was thinking, students, they might feel a bit, frankly, left out in the student aid sweepstakes because the state of North Dakota is financially quite prosperous.
Yep.
But there are proposals to increase the amount of aid that goes to college tuition, but this is $450 million is major bucks, no matter how you slice it.
Without a doubt.
And
right.
I was just thinking, if I was a student, I'd be impressed by that.
Absolutely. And my own father always comments on, he's got colleagues in, for example, Colorado, and if their students are doing well, they go to college almost for free because of the way that Colorado invests in their higher education system. And there's no reason we can't be making larger investments in our system here in North Dakota.
And how is the student cost and debt situation on campus presently?
Well, we actually had a bill earlier this session. I introduced a bill to freeze tuition. So we know that it doesn't go very far, but it brings up this discussion of college affordability. And nationwide, North Dakota ranks very high in the amount of debt that our college students are carrying and how many students are leaving with debt. And we're not doing very well in those areas, especially considering the financial state that North Dakota is in right now. So, relatively speaking, it's about $30,000 by the time you get out of school if you're not paying for it on your own, if you're taking out loans. So it's a tough check.
And Senator Grinberg, can you imagine what your life would have been like getting out of, maybe you did graduate with a lot of debt, but I guess I was fortunate. When I graduated, I did not have much debt. I certainly didn't have the equivalent of $30,000 in dollars of that.
Well, I think, what's been mentioned, I graduated from college. I had $3,000 in student loan debt. But I took out a loan to get a pilot's license. So it wasn't for my college education. It was to enhance my college education because I was in an aviation degree. But I worked my way through school. So I didn't have to borrow any money. And it took me a little longer because I went part-time a couple semesters, but I didn't want to put myself in, serious debt. And I think there's a lot of students today that are doing that. The Ward and June Cleaver days of graduating from college at 22 and starting a family is really not probably
Well, I don't even think I don't think it's possible anymore to work your way through college.
I do. I think you can.
You can?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you're driven enough, you can do it.
You can cover all your costs. Okay.
Without a doubt. If you want it bad enough, you can do it.
Okay. Because the way personally that I did it, I had some savings going in, and I worked. So, if I hadn't had those savings going in, I would not have been in good shape. And frankly, at the student aid regime at the time, you could arbitrage it because you could borrow your student loan money and put it in a CD that paid 12%, and your student loan penny was paying 3%, and you could, the difference would pay for your books.
And let's face it, a college education in North Dakota is quality and it's inexpensive. And if you're committed and focused and really determined to get it and achieve, you will.
I wanted to ask you a bit about the higher education governance system. We had a report today from the higher education, the North Dakota University System General Counsel about allegations of open meetings violations that have been leveled against the board and against the Chancellor, Ham Shirvani. And the report basically concludes that nothing wrong was done except for one meeting that was inadvertent, and they're trying to fix it. I know that you have supported giving the board enough money to buy out the Chancellor's contract, and I wanted to know if you had an opinion of this report and what you think that the Board of Higher Education should do about its governance structure right now.
Well, I have not read the report other than a brief online survey of or online report this afternoon. I find it very unusual. The time that first there wasn't going to be a review and a report till May, and then a week. It's a short decision and a week turnaround. When most open records violations complaints or open meetings that are filed with the Attorney General's office take some time, and this is a very interesting situation that we're in. But I think the board is going to be further embarrassed because this isn't over. And I think what they did today, they didn't do themselves any favors whatsoever. And I think in the near future, I could be wrong, but this isn't over. And I think they just dug the hole deeper.
Representative Overson, do you have a feel for how this is playing on, like, at the UND campus?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I sat in both the NDSA and the UND Student Senate meetings when they cast a vote of no confidence in the Chancellor, and there's been some confusion along the way because there's a lot of behind-the-scenes information that people are finally starting to reveal, and the way it's playing out, I mean, the students are finally coming to see the negative effect this is having on their relationship with the board and with the legislature and with the Chancellor, and they're not able to positively communicate with him anymore.
Got a half an hour. Get the judiciary stuff, and if you got something that came out of IBL, that'd be okay too.
The Legislature Today show continues on 550 Cape Fire, the voice of the Northern Plains, and our affiliates AM 1100 The Flag Fargo and AM Talk Radio 1090 The Flag in the Bakken. And now back to the program with your host, Dale Wetzel, managing editor of Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner.
Good evening. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota, and things are hopping right along. This is the time of the show where we discuss issues with the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, and we have as its representative this evening Mr. Bill Shalhoub, who works as a lobbyist for the Greater North Dakota Chamber of Commerce, and he is also a hotel operator and just a general entrepreneur in Bismarck. We also have with us Senator Kelly Armstrong. He's a Republican from Dickinson. And we have Senator Jessica Unruh, who's a Republican from Beulah. We're going to talk to them about what's been going on at the legislature. And first of all, Senator Armstrong, you spent a good deal of your time this morning speaking about a new legislation to essentially toughen up North Dakota's laws against driving under the influence. And could you just tell us what that law would do and what you see as improvements that could be made to it?
The law we heard this morning was the Senate bill that was sent over after crossover. Essentially what the law does is it eliminates hard license suspensions, fully implements the 24/7 program as a condition of probation for second and subsequent offenses, and then significantly strengthens the minimum mandatory sentencing for second and subsequent DUI offenses. The laws have changed a lot since they were introduced, and part of the reason for that is because there's two separate bills floating, but they've both changed a lot. Part of the reason for that is the practical implications on the ground at the district court level and municipal court level in these local municipalities. Essentially, if the laws would have stayed as is, would have for lack of a better word, crippled our criminal justice system because of the high volume of trials the laws would have produced, given how they were. It's a really important issue. It's a serious issue. It's been a problem in North Dakota for many, many years. There's some very high-profile accidents have brought this to the forefront, and the legislature is both the House and the Senate and the prime sponsors of both these bills are really working hard to get a bill in place that actually can help reduce the number of drunk drivers on the roads while still maintaining the integrity of the law enforcement agencies and the criminal justice system that are charged with implementing these policy changes.
Mr. Shalhoub, as someone who is in the hospitality industry, how do you approach bills of this nature in terms of deciding whether you like them or don't?
Well, we've never spoken up. I don't think the business community or the hospitality industry has ever spoken up on drunk driving bills and things like this. This is up for experts to decide. We're for responsible drinking, and responsible drinking is not drunk driving. Doesn't include drunk driving. We have to get the drunk drivers, particularly the habitual drunk drivers, which I think is more of the problem, off the road. Certainly don't envy the task of trying to do that, and as Senator Armstrong said, to still maintain some sanity in the court system and things like that. I don't know where you go with it. If they come up with better ways or more effective ways, we'll certainly be in favor of them. Nobody wants it, and I can tell you, as a bar owner, person who worked the bars for years and years, boy, that sounds like a bad phrase, doesn't it? But as someone
sounds like something I'd like to do.
Yeah, as someone who was in the bar business for a lot of years, the last thing you want to do is deal with real drunks. I mean, you want people to be there, you want to be having a good time, but the real drunks are hard to handle from everybody's side, from starting with the bar owner and trying to get them out of your bar, and I'm sure the police officers, law enforcement, when they're trying to handle them, and everything else. So more power to them. I hope we can come up with something, and I'm glad to see they're getting, as introduced. I thought, on a personal level, I thought they were a little stringent, and wondered what kind of problems that was going to cause. Happy to hear they're not doing that.
Senator Unruh, first of all, could you just tell us about your district, the district that you represent, and also tell us about, if you would, about any feedback that you've gotten about these DUI bills, or what your constituents think of them.
Oh, thank you. I've got a rather rural district. We've got some smaller communities within it, but most of the feedback that I've heard on these bills has been, we just want to make sure that we don't overload our judicial system with extraneous cases and such. I think Senator Armstrong has and that group has done a fine job of writing this legislation. I think the biggest thing that we need to tackle, that I'm not sure we can do as a legislature, is change the culture in North Dakota and how we think about drunk driving and the actions that we take as individuals when it comes to those decisions. So we can legislate away ourselves up here, and we can create some really great drunk driving laws, but it's the culture that has to change, and it's got to be individual decisions that make that happen.
Senator Armstrong, to what extent, and you addressed this in your testimony this morning, to what extent are people who, say, for example, their families have been impacted by a drunken driving accident, and you have some folks there who have had horrific experiences with drunken driving at the hearing, and they're sitting there and they're listening to testimony about, well, if we do this, we're going to overload our judicial system, and obviously that is something that the legislature needs to consider as a consequence, but at the same time, I imagine it's not an argument that someone who has firsthand experience with what a drunken driver can do has a lot of patience with, and I wonder how you kind of walk that line.
I through the course of this, because I've heard all of them because of the committees I sit on, I've heard both these bills on both sides of it, and I've actually gotten to talk to these families quite a bit, and I would say that, yes, that's correct. They don't necessarily have a lot of patience, and they don't have they're not concerned about the practical implications. They're concerned about doing something that's going to change behavior, as Senator Unruh said. But I will say this, and it's not unanimous and stuff, but when you talk to them, they understand we're working hard. I think a big portion of what they were trying to do is make sure this issue gets front and center in front of the legislature. And whether what we come out with is stringent enough for them or whether they're fully satisfied with that or not, I think they've proven at least one point in the fact that the legislature is taking this issue very, very seriously this session.
I mean, Mr. Shalhoub, when the first bill that got any publicity was the House bill, and at that time it was 4 days in jail if you on your first offense. Yeah. Now that's been scaled back essentially to 1 day in jail on your non-working day if you have a blood alcohol content of 0.21% or greater. And I would like to know what your opinion is personally between those two parameters. I mean, you have on the one hand, you have 4 days in jail for your first offense, whether it's 0.08 or whatever. On the other hand, right now what we have is 1 day in jail on a weekend or a day where you're not scheduled to work if you're at 0.21.
Well, it sounds a lot more reasonable. You know, I go back, I remember the fight we had when we lowered the BAC from 1.0 to 0.08, or 0.1, I guess it would be, to 0.08. And there was a lot of, the state of North Dakota was forced to do that in order to hang on to their highway transportation money, which was a lot of money. It's $700 million a year or something like that comes from the feds for the highway program. And we were, for lack of a better word, blackmailed into doing that. And we fought it a long way just getting down to that. So that the alternative right now, or the amended versions, seem a lot more reasonable. 0.21 is that you've had a few drinks if you've reached a 0.21 BAC, and you really had no business out on the road under any circumstances. So it sounds reasonable. It sounds more reasonable, and hopefully as these things work their way through, they'll arrive at a compromise that is acceptable. Whatever they put in, I know that I'm fairly sure the Hospitality Association, I know the Chamber will be willing to try anything to try and solve the problem. Senator Unruh had an interesting point on the culture, and I'd wonder, just ask her, does that? You were both raised in North Dakota. Is that a culture that comes starting in high school, where the kids really, you grow up with that kind of a culture? You do where I came from.
You do where I came from, too. It wasn't something that was easily avoided, and I know people argue that kids are bored and they don't have enough to do in our state, and I have always argued that point. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just, it is a culture thing, and it's a decision that they make to go out and do this. This is what they're going to do on a Friday night, and I think that we can provide other opportunities for our kids, whether it be sports or arts or any other type of activity. Our parents need to be active with that, and I think over time we can change that culture. But yes, I do. I think it starts early.
What was your culture growing up, Senator Armstrong?
I've used this example a lot, and I think this fits primarily Western North Dakota real well. And from Senator Unruh's age all the way up, is we work hard and we play hard. We have a lot of things that we do well in North Dakota. There's not, especially when I grew up, there wasn't a tremendous amount of drug use. There wasn't any of this violent activities. There might have been a couple fights here and there at a party or whatever. We didn't have a lot of those other things, but the one thing that's always been around, it was always around in my childhood, all the way high school, college, law school, is, our relationship with alcohol is maybe a little too friendly, I guess, is the best answer. We work hard and we play hard.
Yep.
Just to turn to a completely different subject, one of the things that's been going on in the legislature this week have to do with constitutional amendments to change how the Board of Higher Education, change how the university system is governed, and to get rid of the Board of Higher Education. We have a proposal to replace the Higher Education Board with a elected commissioner. We have one to replace the Board of Higher Education with a Department of Higher Education, which has a person leading it appointed by the governor. We had a bill. There are a number of these ideas floating about, and I wanted to know, and I guess I'll start with you, Senator Unruh. What is the sentiment in your district, if there is any interest in this subject, about whether or not the Board of Higher Education needs to be radically overhauled or eliminated as a way of providing better governance to North Dakota's public colleges?
I think overall in my district, almost everybody can agree that they can see and acknowledge the problems that are within our higher education system. I have had numerous conversations about this with my constituents, and of course nobody has the answer, or else we'd have it fixed already. But the overall sentiment in my district is definitely that there's a problem and we need to fix it, and I think that's one of the big reasons why we're here this session, is to see maybe not necessarily make any radical changes, or maybe I don't have the answer myself either, but some changes, some form of change should happen.
And Senator Armstrong, you have a college in your district, and how is the idea of getting rid of the Board of Higher Education percolating in Dickinson?
Well, Dickinson State University has an interesting 24 months. So I think in my district, because I also represent many rural areas around it, I think that the overwhelming sentiment is, as a legislature, we come up, and I get to say this because this is my first session here, is every 2 years we come down here and we complain and we whine and we have issues about higher education, and then we give them 120% of what we gave them 2 years ago. And tuition is going up, the value of a degree is going down, and there's more and more money being siphoned off into this organization, and people in my district want to see that change. With Dickinson State University and some other things that have gone on, we want to see some changes. I mean, we have a real good president now, D.C. Costin. He came from Fargo, and he's doing a real good job. But it just brought the problems with the higher education center right home to our district, because DSU has always kind of been like a shining star for Dickinson. Still is, by the way, but it's really addressed some major issues, and I think people want to see real change in how we administer this system.
Do you think that folks would be willing to go as far as getting rid of the Board of Higher Education and replacing it with a higher ed czar, whether that person is appointed or elected?
I hope we get a chance to find out.
All right. What do you think,
we hear the same thing from the business community, that we rely on the higher education system to be a real driver and a partner in our trying to improve the business environment in the state. The research ends of it have been wonderful in producing things, and we've grown the business because of it. On the other hand, like Senator Armstrong said, we keep giving them somewhere between up to the last couple of bienniums 20% increases. This year it's 9% onto their base budget. That doesn't count the buildings or any of the other things we're going to do. Now their budget just went over $900 million of general fund money. Now that's a serious number when you think about it. And the business community, while we acknowledge that they're great, they haven't exactly been the best stewards of our money when you look at some of the problems that have been created and things like that. And I think what they'd like to see is a way that they could become better stewards of our money, in doing that. And maybe one of the constitutional measures, we at one time we were going to take all the colleges out of the Constitution, and maybe we're going to close a couple. That was, I think, maybe that. And the voters rejected that, and that's fine. Everybody's in the Constitution now. But in terms of governance, maybe we ought to take a little look at picking the best, having the legislature pick the best of those alternatives, put it in front of the voters, and see what they think. And that would give an answer as to what they really want to do. And maybe that's the way to go to really get past this huge mistrust and disconnect we seem to have between the Board of Higher Ed and the rest of the state's citizens of North Dakota, because that's what it seems to be. Just a huge disconnect at this moment.
Senator Unruh, one of the big economic forces in your district is the coal industry, and there's been so much concentration on oil, so much concentration on natural gas, so much concentration on wind. It seems like coal doesn't get paid attention to anymore. Is that something that you think is a fair analysis? And what are the coal industry's priorities during this session? What is it that they want, that they think that can make their business future a bit more rosy?
I think the way that we're kind of looking at things right now is that we've been stable. We really have been. We've been providing baseload electricity or power for baseload electricity for 30 years within this state, and we've been in oil's position. We've been the ones, the say shining stars, the main attraction for years, and we got everything kind of set up the way that it it worked well for the state and worked well for us. We've got our tax system already set up. We've got different funds that the counties in my district benefit from to be able to create extra infrastructure for the schools, and that's something that I've kind of taken under my belt when I got here. I made sure I learned all of the coal tax structures and where all that money is going, how much is in those funds, and just making sure that everybody is taken care of and that our money's not getting funneled somewhere else, so that we can take advantage of that. But as far as priorities for us this session, I think we're just trying to make sure that everything keeps going smoothly, because it has been. I sat in on an appropriations hearing for the Public Service Commission budget a couple weeks ago, and one thing that got brought up was that coal really needs to make sure that they spread the message, because people hear about us, they know about us, and they a lot of times just hear dirty coal. That's a term that's prominent throughout the nation, and that is something that we've been trying very hard to get the message out. We love to show off our reclamation out at the mine. Our state standards are much higher. Our reclamation standards are higher than the federal standards allow, and so that's something that we like to show off, and we're encouraged in that hearing to show off. So we'd like to encourage people to come out and check us out. And
Mr. Shalhoub, do you think that the coal industry is taken for granted?
I think that it's not taken for granted. It's an important part of North Dakota. If you look at the work that the Lignite Energy Council does and the Research Council and all that, it's ongoing. But I think, as Senator Under said, it's stable. It's been there, and it's still going. And I liked her analogy a lot about being stable and the oil industry being young and searching for all these things. And we're really searching in oil for how do we fund all the infrastructure in Senator Armstrong's district, and what's happening in Dickinson and Williston particularly, Minot to a somewhat of a less degree, but still a lot there. How do we do all those things, and then how do we continue or go into the future and tax oil in order to make sure it gets done? Our policy has always been, we take care of infrastructure first, we take care of people second, which is the people in North Dakota, and then we kind of look to the oil industry to go there. Now, there's a couple of meaningful bills on oil taxes, and we haven't taken a position on them. Frankly, we don't know enough about oil taxes in general to comment, so better to be silent. But I think that as those things, I'd like to think that we're going to get settled down on that, and we're going to arrive at some good pieces of legislation and some working with our friends, because they are our friends in the oil industry. They've done a tremendous amount for North Dakota as part of this process, that we can all arrive at things that are fair.
Senator Armstrong, we kind of segue into the oil tax regime in North Dakota, and there are significant efforts during the session to change it, to restructure the tax, to lower some of the rates, to get rid of some of the quote-unquote loopholes. What is your impression of how this effort has gone, and how important do you think it is during this session to change how oil is taxed in North Dakota?
The oil tax restructuring deal is kind of an interesting thing, and there's an interesting history to it, and a lot of the exemptions that were there and the things that have played out and how it has gone has dealt with the boom area of the late 70s, early 80s, then the bust area of the mid 80s, and then some of the Bowman County stuff, the lodgepole stuff in the mid 90s, and now obviously the Bakken and the Three Forks. And through the course of that, we've developed this very, very complicated and in some ways obsolete tax structure and how things work. And I think simplifying the oil tax code is a good idea. I think simplifying any of our tax codes is a good idea. Make it easy, make it simple, cut out some of these exemptions, get a fair rate, and ensure long-term prosperity. I mean, the one thing North Dakota has been very good with, and with the coal industry and as well as anything else, is being a pro-business environment. That being said, from this legislator who also happens to be in the oil business, property tax, income tax, broad-based tax reform, those need to come first, but there's no reason we can't do them all. And just quickly as a side note, I would just say, as if I was in the coal industry, I think it's a good thing if you're flying under the radar at the legislature. If the legislator doesn't have the eyes on your industry, it's a great couple of months. So.
Senator Unruh, to what extent are your constituents engaged in the debate over oil taxes? And are you hearing opinions from them as to whether North Dakota's taxation system on oil should be changed?
I'll be very honest with you. I have not received a whole lot of feedback on the oil tax restructure, but I have a fairly conservative district. So simplifying tax code, as Senator Armstrong just mentioned, is going to be something that people are going to be happy with. I was questioned about it when I got home over crossover with just a small group of friends. Why are we cutting these guys a tax break? What the heck's going on here? And I explained the actual tax restructuring that has been proposed, and once it gets explained to people, they seem to understand it. Senator Armstrong explained it very well. It's a restructure to simplify things.
Both you and Senator Armstrong are serving your first term. We have about a minute left. What do you think?
Oh, it's great. I'm really, really excited to be here, really happy to be here, and really enjoying myself. We've got a great group of senators, a great group of freshmen, and we've been learning a lot with a lot of help from all of the veterans here.
They have unbelievably good scotcheroos in the cafeteria. So I have to stay clear of it. No, it's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. I've already made lifelong friends, and we've only been here a short period of time. So,
how has it been different from what you expected, or did you expect anything in particular?
I have to be honest. When I come into a brand new situation, I try not to have any expectations. I told somebody this particular week has been the single